Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Look, the headlines right now about the US and Iran are moving at absolute lightning speed, right? It's just a constant barrage of military jargon, diplomatic chess moves, and frankly, conflicting reports. So, we're cutting through all that noise today. We're zeroing in strictly on the facts on the ground and on the water to give you a clear, no-nonsense sitrep or situation report on what's going down in literally one of the most critical waterways on the entire planet, the Strait of Hormuz. Let's get right into it. To really wrap our heads around the sheer scale of this crisis, we have to talk about a pretty staggering number: 1,500. As of early May 2026, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff confirmed that's the number of commercial vessels currently trapped inside the Persian Gulf. Think about that. That is 1,500 massive cargo ships and oil tankers totally paralyzed by the threat of military engagement. They literally can't leave. So we're not just looking at a military standoff here. It's a massive global logistical bottleneck. To untangle this whole thing, we're breaking it down into 5 key parts. First, the fragile ceasefire. Second, shifting U.S. military operations. Third, flashpoints in the strait. Fourth, global diplomatic maneuvers. And finally, number 5, the economic global impact. Starting right off with part 1, the fragile ceasefire holds. So since April 8th, after those intense weeks of conflict between the US, Israel, and Iran, we've technically had a temporary truce in place. But as you're about to see, what actually defines a ceasefire totally depends on who you're asking. US Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth put it very bluntly: right now, the ceasefire certainly holds. From the US perspective, even with the recent exchanges of fire and attacks on commercial ships, it still hasn't crossed the line into restarting major combat operations. The Pentagon is treating that April 8th agreement as the baseline, though they've made it crystal clear that US forces are still locked, loaded, and ready to go if Iran pushes too far. Now, flip the coin and look at the Iranian perspective, because it's a very different story. Iranian chief negotiator Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf recently came out and said, "The continuation of the status quo is intolerable for America, whilst we haven't even started yet." Wow, right? Iran is insisting they control the maritime traffic there, and they've warned that any ship diverting from their approved routes is going to face a firm response. So you've got this massive disconnect. The US says the ceasefire is intact, and Iranian leadership is practically shouting that they haven't even fully flexed their leverage yet. Which brings us to part 2, shifting US military operations. If you've been scrolling through the updates, you've definitely seen some military operation names floating around, and it gets confusing fast. Let's bust through that jargon. First up is Operation Epic Fury. That was the offensive combat mission that kicked off back in February. And according to Secretary of State Marco Rubio, that operation is officially in the books. Concluded, the US hit its objectives. Then you have Project Freedom. This was launched specifically to safely escort commercial ships through the Strait of Hormuz. It's strictly defensive, meaning US forces only shoot if they are shot at. But here's the catch. As of Tuesday night, President Trump officially hit pause on Project Freedom to give peace negotiations a window to progress. But hey, don't let that pause fool you. The US military footprint there is still absolutely massive. The naval blockade on Iranian ports, it is in full effect. US Central Command says they've already directed 51 vessels to turn right around or head back to port. And to back that up, the US still has over 15,000 service members deployed in the region, with more than 100 aircraft providing defensive overwatch. So yeah, the offensive strikes might be over, but there is still a giant wall of US military deterrence sitting right there in the Gulf. Moving on to part 3, flashpoints in the strait. We have to look at the actual waters of the strait to see how much this ceasefire has actually been tested, especially over an incredibly volatile 48-hour stretch. Let's map it out. On Monday, Iran launched 15 missiles at the UAE and actually attacked commercial ships, the first time since the April truce. Then Monday night, 2 U.S. destroyers, the Truxtun and the Mason, had to navigate a sustained barrage of Iranian drones and missiles while escorting ships, and they destroyed several Iranian fast boats along the way. Fast forward to Tuesday, and a suspected missile strike disables a South Korean cargo ship, the Namu, and hits the French-owned CGM San Antonio, which unfortunately caused crew injuries. It was only after that unbelievable spike in violence that President Trump paused Project Freedom Tuesday night when diplomatic channels suddenly opened. And, while it's easy to get caught up talking about warships and missiles, we absolutely cannot lose sight of the human element here. 22,500. That's the estimated number of commercial mariners. Just regular people, sailors from all over the globe, who are literally stranded in the crossfire of this standoff. The human cost of this bottleneck is just profound. Thousands of people trapped on their ships right now, just praying these diplomatic channels actually work.
Let's look at those efforts in Part 4, Global Diplomatic Maneuvers.
A crisis of this magnitude doesn't just stay in the Middle East, right? The global chessboard is lighting up. Pakistan has actually stepped into the spotlight as the primary mediator, and it was their request that got the U.S. to pause Project Freedom for peace talks. Over in Asia, China, who buys a massive amount of Iranian oil, by the way, is hosting Iran's foreign minister in Beijing for bilateral talks, literally just before President Trump is scheduled to visit. Meanwhile, in Europe, Germany is moving a minesweeping ship, the Fulda, down to the Mediterranean, just in case an international coalition has to go in and clear the Strait of sea mines. And Israel? They are on extremely high alert. Their military chief confirmed their entire air force is primed to deploy eastward if Iran attacks them again. So pretty much every major world power is either scrambling for peace or bracing for a wider conflict. On the official diplomatic front, the U.S. and its Gulf allies are really pushing hard for a new resolution at the UN. This proposal lays out some heavy demands. It threatens sanctions if Iran doesn't stop attacking ships, stop imposing what the U.S. is calling illegal tolls, disclose exactly where they've placed all their sea mines, and open up a humanitarian corridor. Secretary Rubio was incredibly blunt about this, accusing Iran of holding the entire global economy hostage. And he's framing this UN vote as the ultimate test of whether the United Nations can actually step up and solve a major global crisis. And that brings us to our final section, Part 5, the economic global impact. Because let's be real, we need to bring this high-level geopolitics straight home to your wallet. $4.48. According to AAA, at the time of this sitrep, that is the national average for a gallon of regular gas here in the U.S. Now sure, energy markets are super complex, but you just cannot ignore the 1,500 ships trapped in the Persian Gulf. They are a massive anchor weighing down global energy supplies, and it is causing some serious market anxiety. Let's break down the stakes for everyone. Historically, the Strait of Hormuz handles about 1/5 of the entire world's oil transit, 20%. When you choke that off, literally every commodity on Earth gets more expensive. On the flip side, Iran's domestic economy is suffocating right now. They are dealing with skyrocketing inflation under the crushing weight of the conflict and this intense U.S. blockade. But the U.S. government is actively warning that the pain we're feeling at the pump right now is nothing compared to the alternative. Secretary Rubio actually told reporters that if a nuclear-armed Iran were allowed to just close the straits completely unchecked, Americans could easily be staring down gas prices of $8 or $9 a gallon, and we'd have zero military options left to stop them. No way anyone wants to see that. So it all boils down to this one critical question. As President Trump and international mediators scramble to lock down a final, comprehensive deal, is this fragile ceasefire actually going to survive the turbulent waters of the Strait? Or is a single miscalculation, one rogue drone, one missile, one fast boat, going to drag the world's navies right back into full-blown combat? The stakes literally could not be higher, both for the thousands of mariners trapped at sea and for the global economy hanging by a thread. We are going to keep tracking the data and the sources to bring you the facts as they unfold. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, stay focused, and I'll see you next time.